Tamsin Cord was elbow-deep in the guts of a mining drone when the alarm klaxon blared, its wail bouncing between the metal walls like a hyperactive echo. Somewhere in the bowels of Vesta Prime, a child was probably crying from the noise, and Tamsin could sympathize. She cursed under her breath, wrenching her arm free and flicked on her comm. "What now?" she barked into the mic, wiping a smear of oil on her pants. Lyric Valter's voice crackled through, smooth with the kind of diplomatic charm that made you want to throttle him or buy him a drink. "Tamsin, darling, seems we've hit a bit of a cosmic snag. Need you at the control room ASAP. Snag. That's what you call it when the recycling system backs up. This sounds like a catastrophe," she replied, already jogging through the corridor, boots clanging on the decking. Vesta Prime was a place where optimism came to die, and no one missed it. "Just your average day in paradise," Lyric answered, a chuckle hidden in his words. He was probably lounging in his chair, looking like he owned the place when in reality, no one owned anything on this rock. As if he could read minds, Lyric added, "Don't worry, I'll try not to enjoy the chaos too much without you." Tamsin snorted. "Save me a seat at the disaster table." She reached the control room, greeted by the sight of Lyric leaning against a console, his expression somewhere between bemused and bored. "Oh good, you're here," he said with a smirk that could brighten up a black hole. "We've found something in the mining shaft." "What, a new shade of dirt?" Tamsin quipped, scanning the monitors. Her eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Anomaly." Lyric gestured at the screen, displaying a swirling mass that looked like someone had taken a spoon to the fabric of space-time. "That, my dear engineer, is what you might call a cosmic anomaly." "Cosmic anomaly. Sounds like a fancy name for we're screwed," Tamsin muttered, leaning closer. "And what the hell is that thing?" Lyric tapped a few keys, zooming in on the anomaly's center. "Behold the mysterious object. Came from Earth, apparently." Tamsin squinted at the screen. "An Earth artifact out here. That makes as much sense as a solar-powered flashlight. That's why it's fun," Lyric replied, folding his arms. "The council's in an uproar. Political tensions are running higher than my last diplomatic meeting with those Jovian dignitaries." "So, a complete disaster," Tamsin said, deadpan. "And you called me here to do what exactly?" "Well, you're the best engineer on this rock," Lyric said, not bothering to hide the compliment behind his usual sarcasm. "We need you to figure out what it is and if it'll blow us up." Tamsin sighed, rubbing her temples. "Fine, I'll take a look. But if this thing is the cause of some interstellar Armageddon, I'm haunting you." "Promises, promises," Lyric replied, winking. "Now go play with your toys." "Right," Tamsin muttered, grabbing her toolkit. "Let's see what kind of ancient Earth garbage we're dealing with." She headed for the excavation site, the corridors of Vesta Prime narrowing like the chances of a quiet day here. The site was a mess of rock, metal, and disgruntled miners, all of them staring at the anomaly like it owed them money. Tamsin pushed through the crowd, ignoring the mutters and stares. "Out ta the way, folks. Science in progress." She approached the anomaly, its swirling edges glinting with colors that had no business existing. "Well, aren't you a pretty little headache?" she murmured, setting up her equipment. As she scanned the object, a faint hum filled the air, the kind that made your skin crawl. "You hear that?" she asked one of the miners, a grizzled veteran named Hark who looked like he wouldn't be impressed if the galaxy collapsed around him. "Hear what?" Hark grumbled, studying the anomaly with a mixture of boredom and mild concern. "Never mind," Tamsin said, adjusting her scanner. "Just my imagination, probably. Or the sound of my sanity unraveling. Same thing." The readings made no sense, which was par for the course on Vesta Prime. She frowned, jotting down notes. "This shouldn't be here," she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. "You're telling me," Hark replied, spitting to the side. "Thing gives me the creeps. Reckon it's cursed." "Cursed? Seriously? What is this, a space opera?" Tamsin scoffed. "No, it's just weird." "Weird is just fancy talk for cursed," Hark muttered, eyeing the anomaly with suspicion. Tamsin ignored him, focusing on the task. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "All right, let's see if this baby has a manual." She reached for the object, feeling a buzz of energy just shy of being unpleasant. "Be careful," Lyric's voice came through her calm, a hint of genuine concern slipping through his usual bravado. "Careful's my middle name," Tamsin lied, fingers grazing the object's surface. Instantly, a surge of information flooded her mind, images and sounds flashing like a broken holovid. She staggered back, clutching her head. "Okay, that was something," she gasped, blinking away the afterimages. Lyric's voice was sharp. "Tamsin, you all right?" "Just peachy," she rasped, trying to steady her breathing. "Whatever this is, it's not just a paperweight." "What did you see?" Lyric asked, his tone urgent. "Bits and pieces," Tamsin replied, shaking her head to clear it. "Some kind of message, maybe. It's ancient and definitely not friendly." "Well, that's comforting," Lyric said dryly. "Can you decipher it?" Tamsin shrugged, her mind still reeling. "I can try, but if it starts asking for a password, we're screwed." "Start with 1234, that's what I always use," Lyric quipped. "Yeah, that'll work," Tamsin shot back, rolling her eyes. "Give me some time, I'll see what I can dig up." The calm went dead, leaving her with the hum of the anomaly and the occasional muttering from the miners. She exhaled slowly, squaring her shoulders. Time to play detective with a relic of humanity's past. "All right, you mysterious hunk of junk," she murmured, setting to work. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding." The day dragged on, and Tamsin lost herself in the puzzle, each breakthrough only leading to more questions. She jotted notes, cross-referenced data, and cursed the anomaly in increasingly creative ways. As she worked, the implications gnawed at her. If this thing was what she suspected, it was a game changer, but for better or worse. That was the million-credit question, and she had a sneaking suspicion the answer wasn't going to make anyone happy. Hours later, when the artificial lights of Vesta Prime dimmed to simulate night, Tamsin finally leaned back, rubbing her eyes. "Lyric, you there?" she called through the calm. "Still here," his voice came through with just a hint of a yawn. "Find anything worth getting unscheduled for?" "Depends," she replied, pausing for dramatic effect. "Do you want the good news or the bad news?" "Hit me with the bad first," Lyric said, his tone resigned. "All right." Tamsin took a deep breath. "This is no ordinary anomaly. It's a message buried out here for God knows how long. And it's a warning." There was a long silence on the other end. "And the good news?" Lyric asked finally. "The good news," Tamsin said, a wry smile tugging at her lips, "is I haven't accidentally triggered the apocalypse. Yet." Lyric let out a dry chuckle. "Yet. Always the optimist, aren't you, Tamsin?" "Hey, someone's got to balance out your relentless sunshine," she shot back. "But seriously, we need to figure out what this thing is trying to tell us." "Agreed," Lyric replied, his tone serious now. "I'll get the council on board, but you know how they are, more politics than productivity." "Great," Tamsin muttered. "Just what we need, more bureaucratic bungling." "Look on the bright side, at least we know there's something worth all this fuss," Lyric offered, trying for optimistic and failing spectacularly. Tamsin sighed, gazing at the anomaly. "Yeah, but whether it's worth it." "Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And I suppose we're the lucky ones who get to find out," Lyric added, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and dread. "Lucky us," Tamsin agreed, not quite able to muster the enthusiasm. "I just hope we survive the answer." "Well, if we don't," Lyric said, keeping his tone light, "at least we won't have to deal with the council's budget meetings anymore." Tamsin chuckled, nodding. "There's that." She packed up her tools, casting one last glance at the anomaly. "Let's hope tomorrow brings more answers and fewer questions." "Here's to hoping," Lyric replied. "Get some rest, Tamsin. You're gonna need it." "Yeah, you too," she said, closing the comm. She made her way back through the corridors, the weight of their discovery settling heavily on her shoulders. As she reached her quarters, she paused, glancing out at the stars beyond the asteroid's surface. They twinkled indifferently, a reminder of how small their troubles were in the grand scheme of things. "Here's to surviving," she murmured to the cosmos. "And to whatever the hell is coming next." With that, she turned away, ready to face whatever the next day would bring. Tamsin Cord had barely closed her eyes for a blissful moment of rest when her comm buzzed obnoxiously, like an angry hornet hell-bent on making her life miserable. She groaned, the kind of sound that came from deep within, resonating with her very soul's fatigue. But Vesta Prime never waited for anyone to catch their beauty sleep, not that its residents had much beauty to salvage. Tamsin slapped the comm on and found herself glaring at Lyric Valter's irritatingly well-rested face. "You look like you just won a nap lottery. What's the emergency now?" "Morning to you too, sunshine," Lyric said, lounging with an elegance that seemed downright unfair in their dingy surroundings. "We've got a bit of a situation. The Zalithian Empire caught wind of our little cosmic secret." Tamsin sat up, the fog of sleep replaced by a sharper, more cynical clarity. "Oh joy! What, did they lose a game of rock, paper, scissors and decide to ruin our day?" "Pretty much," Lyric responded, his smile thin. "They're sending a delegation. They're about as suspicious as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs." "What do they think it is? A galactic piñata?" Tamsin asked, swinging her legs off the cot and reaching for her boots. "They think it's a threat," Lyric said, with a shrug that suggested he'd already spent too much time pondering their motives. "Or an opportunity. The Zalithians are nothing if not opportunistic." Tamsin frowned. "So, what do we do when they get here? Roll out the red carpet or hide the good china?" "More like roll up our sleeves and prepare for the headache of galactic diplomacy," Lyric replied, rubbing his temples as if anticipating the migraine. "They'll want to examine the anomaly." "Of course they do. Can't have a mysterious artifact without a side of interstellar politics," Tamsin grumbled, pulling on her jacket. "And I suppose you want me to, what, serve them tea and explain the cosmic enigma?" "Something like that," Lyric said. "You're the only one who managed to get anything out of it. They'll want to know what you know." Tamsin sighed, the kind of weary exhalation that was a staple of life on Vesta Prime. "Great. I always wanted to give a PowerPoint presentation to a bunch of space lizards." "Hey, cheer up. Maybe they'll be charmed by your winning personality," Lyric said with a wink. "If by charmed you mean terrified, then yeah, maybe," Tamsin shot back. She glanced out the narrow porthole where distant stars twinkled indifferently. "Well, let's go play nice with the neighbors." The Zalithian delegation arrived with all the subtlety of an asteroid impact. Their ship, a sleek, angular monstrosity, docked with Vesta Prime, casting a long shadow over the mining outpost. It was as though death itself had decided to stop by for tea and a chat about existential dread. Tamsin and Lyric met them at the docking bay, where the air hummed with an undercurrent of tension. The Zalithians were a tall, scaled species, their eyes a disconcerting shade of yellow that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. Their leader, a hulking figure with an ornate insignia on his chest, stepped forward, surveying the humans with an expression that suggested they were an unfortunate anomaly in his otherwise impeccable day. "Greetings," said the Zalithian leader, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air. "I am Archon Sarax of the Zalithian Empire. We are here to ensure that this anomaly does not pose a threat to the galaxy." "Nice to meet you, Archon Sarax," Lyric said, his diplomatic smile stretched to its limits. "I'm Lyric Valter, and this is Tamsin Cord, our lead engineer." "Engineer," Sarax commented, his eyes settling on Tamsin with what could generously be described as mild interest. "You have interacted with the anomaly, more than I'd like," Tamsin replied, crossing her arms. "It's a message or a warning, but deciphering it is like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube in the dark." Sarax tilted his head, a gesture that Tamsin interpreted as curiosity or perhaps indigestion. "You must show us this anomaly." "Of course," Lyric said smoothly, gesturing for the delegation to follow. "Right this way." As they led the Zalithians through the corridors of Vesta Prime, Tamsin observed the visitors with a healthy dose of skepticism. They were a walking, talking reminder that no good deed or discovery went unpunished. And if the Zalithians had their way, the punishment would probably involve a lot more legal paperwork than she had the stomach for. The mining site was as they'd left it, dusty, cluttered, and populated by curious miners who had taken up unofficial spectator roles. The anomaly itself remained untouched, its swirling mass a constant reminder that the universe loved a good mystery. "There it is," Tamsin said, gesturing at the anomaly with a flourish that was more sarcastic than theatrical. "Our very own Pandora's box." Sarax and his delegation approached the anomaly, their expressions inscrutable. "And you say it is a message?" Sarax inquired, leaning in closer. "Yeah, a cryptic one," Tamsin replied, hands on her hips. "All it needs is a haunting melody, and it could headline at a space opera." Sarax shot her a look that suggested humor was not a strong suit in the Zalithian social repertoire. "The Empire will require a full analysis of this object," he declared. "Of course you will," Tamsin said, unable to keep the sarcasm out of her voice. "Because nothing says scientific integrity like handing over all your homework." Lyric coughed diplomatically. "We'll be happy to share our findings," he interjected smoothly. "Perhaps together we can ensure the safety of all involved." Sarax nodded, apparently satisfied. "We will remain here until we have what we need," he announced, turning to discuss logistics with his entourage. Tamsin leaned closer to Lyric, lowering her voice. "This is going to be a nightmare, isn't it?" "Undoubtedly," Lyric murmured back. "But at least it's an entertaining one." "Entertaining like a root canal," Tamsin muttered, eyeing the Zalithians as they poked and prodded at the anomaly. "Here's hoping they don't make it worse." As the day unfolded, the Zalithians conducted their own analysis of the anomaly, their tools and techniques as alien as their elongated features. Tamsin watched with a mix of professional curiosity and personal disdain, occasionally offering commentary that Lyric, ever the diplomat, translated into something resembling tact. "Do you think they have a clue what they are doing?" Tamsin asked, watching a Zalithian scientist fiddle with a device that looked suspiciously like a blender. Lyric chuckled softly. "With any luck, they'll find out as much as we did and leave us in peace." "Optimism. I knew you had a flaw somewhere," Tamsin teased, glancing at him. "But seriously, what's the endgame here? They take what they learn and leave, or is this the beginning of a beautiful friendship?" "More like a mutually tense coexistence," Lyric said, keeping an eye on the Zalithians. "But hopefully they'll be satisfied with our cooperation and not insist on sticking around longer than necessary." "Yeah, because what we really need is another layer of bureaucracy," Tamsin said, rolling her eyes. "I swear if aliens ever decide to invade, they'll probably trip over all the red tape first." "Let's just make sure they don't decide we're hiding anything," Lyric said, his voice serious now. "The last thing we need is an interstellar incident." Tamsin nodded, running a hand through her hair. "Guess all we can do is wait and see then." The hours ticked by, the Zalithians working with a precision that was both impressive and slightly unsettling. They communicated in their own language, a series of clicks and hisses that sounded more like a malfunctioning airlock than anything remotely conversational. Every now and then, Sarax would glance at Tamsin, his gaze lingering as if trying to decipher her as easily as he hoped to decipher the anomaly. Finally, as the artificial day began to wane, Sarax approached Tamsin and Lyric. "We have gathered sufficient data," he announced, his tone giving away nothing. "And?" Lyric prompted, a smile still in place though his eyes were sharp. Sarax seemed to consider his words carefully. "This anomaly is intriguing. It holds potential for both peril and profit." "Sounds like a weekend on Vesta Prime," Tamsin quipped, earning a disapproving glance from Sarax. "We will report our findings to the Empire," Sarax continued, "and remain in contact regarding any developments." "Of course," Lyric agreed, ever the diplomat. "Thank you for your cooperation, Archon Sarax." "We look forward to continued collaboration." Sarax nodded curtly. "May the stars guide your path," he intoned, turning to leave with his delegation in tow. As the Zalithians departed, Tamsin let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Well, that was about as fun as juggling plasma grenades." Lyric chuckled, though his expression was thoughtful. "Let's hope their report satisfies them. Last thing we need is the Empire breathing down our necks." "Here's hoping," Tamsin said, gazing at the anomaly. "But something tells me this isn't over." "Probably not," Lyric agreed, clapping her on the shoulder. "Let's get some rest. We've earned it." As they left the mining site, Tamsin cast one last glance at the anomaly, its swirling depths a constant, enigmatic presence. Whatever secrets it held, whatever warnings it contained, they were now part of a much larger game, a game where the stakes were as high as the void itself. "Here's to surviving," Tamsin murmured again, echoing her own words. "And to whatever the hell is coming next." Vesta Prime's charm, or utter lack thereof, was its predictability. Life here followed a rhythm of creaking machinery, dust clouds, and the sweet sound of miners cursing at broken equipment. The Zalithians, however, were about as subtle as a blaster in a crowded cantina, and their demands were about to turn Vesta Prime into a new kind of hellhole. Tamsin Cord, never much of a morning person or an afternoon one, if we're being honest, stood in the bustling hub of the colony, her arms crossed as she listened to Sarax's latest decree over the calm. The Zalithians had decided that in the interest of galactic stability, they would be imposing a few temporary restrictions on the colony. Apparently, a few meant a plethora, because Sarax's voice droned on like a bureaucrat with no concept of brevity. "Resource allocation will be monitored by our operatives," Sarax declared, his tone suggesting this was a favor rather than an occupation. "All communications in and out of Vesta Prime will be reviewed. This is essential for ensuring that no misinformation regarding the anomaly is spread." Misinformation, Tamsin scoffed, watching the miners' faces shift from weary to downright mutinous. "Next, they'll be telling us how to brush our teeth." Lyric Valter, standing beside her, gave a resigned sigh. "I suppose we should have expected this." "Once they latch on, they don't let go easily. Like a pit dog on a bone," Tamsin muttered, rubbing her temples. "What do they think we're going to do? Send out invitations for a galaxy-wide scavenger hunt?" "Doesn't help that Sarax has all the charisma of a black hole," Lyric said with a tight smile. "We'll have to tread carefully." Keep the miners calm. Tamsin wasn't sure what was harder, calming miners who'd been pushed to their limits or figuring out how to deal with a cosmic enigma that might be a ticking time bomb. "We need to keep looking at that Earth tech," she said, her voice low. "If there's something in there that can help us, or at least make them back off." Lyric nodded. "Covertly, of course. Last thing we need is them thinking we're conspiring against them. They already think that," Tamsin replied. "But yeah, no need to actually confirm their paranoia." The comm buzzed again, this time with a message about restricted movement outside the colony's main hub. Tamsin couldn't help but laugh, a harsh, sardonic sound. "Restricted movement? On Vesta? What are they afraid of? That we'll all hop on our imaginary spaceships and zoom off into the sunset? More likely they just don't want us poking into areas they haven't sanctioned," Lyric replied. "Not that there's much to poke, considering most of Vesta's as barren as a politician's promises." "Barren and broken," Tamsin amended, gesturing to a mining drone that was currently doing its best impression of a paperweight. "Speaking of which, I'd better get back to fixing what I can." Leaving Lyric to handle the diplomatic disaster that was Sarax's announcement, Tamsin headed back to her makeshift workshop. It was a cramped space filled with gadgets and parts that had seen better decades, if not centuries. She picked up a spanner, giving it a little twirl before leaning over her current project. A mining drone that had apparently decided its purpose in life was to hold dirt, not remove it. "Come on, you worthless hunk of junk," she muttered, tightening bolts with the fervor of someone who'd like to imagine each twist was around a certain scaled neck. "You and me, we're gonna get through this if it kills us." The drone clicked and whirred to life, coughing up a spew of dust like an asthmatic cat. Tamsin stepped back, wiping her forehead. "See, all it takes is a little TLC," she said to no one in particular, which was fitting since no one in particular was listening. "You talking to machines again, Tam?" called a voice from the doorway. It was Harker, one of the miners, a burly guy with a face like a rock slide. heard Sarex's orders. Folks ain't happy. Can't blame them, Tamsin replied, setting down her tools. But we need to keep it together. Last thing we need is Sarex getting twitchy. Harker grunted, which was about as eloquent as he got on a good day. Twitchy's one word for it. Still, if anyone can figure out this mess, it's you, yeah. My resume reads expert in cosmic messages and dealing with alien overlords, she said dryly. But thanks for the vote of confidence. He laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. We'll get through this. Just gotta keep our heads down and mouths shut, Tamsin thought as she watched Harker head back to the mines. It wasn't much of a strategy, but in a place like Vesta Prime, it was often the only one that worked. Tamsin had a sneaking suspicion that keep your head down was about to become the colony's unofficial motto. After another few hours of battling obstinate machinery, Tamsin decided to take a break. She stepped outside, where the bleak landscape of Vesta Prime greeted her like an old, unwelcome friend. The ground was cracked and dry, the sky a perpetual gray that seemed to reflect their collective mood. If there was beauty to be found here, it was in its brutal honesty. She found Lyric leaning against a railing, looking out at the horizon, which was more a suggestion than an actual line. Needed some fresh air, she asked, joining him. If you can call it that, he said, waving a hand at the dust-laden breeze. Just thinking about our next move. Next move is figuring out what Sarex doesn't want us to know, Tamsin said. And doing it before he decides we're more trouble than we're worth. Always a comforting thought, Lyric replied with a wry smile. But you're right. We need to delve deeper into that tech, which means sneaking past our new reptilian babysitters, Tamsin said, glancing back toward the colony's central hub where the Zalithian presence was most heavily felt. I've got some ideas. Might not be pretty, but they could work. Lyric arched an eyebrow. You've got that look in your eye. Which one? The one that says we're doomed or the one that says I have a plan? A little of both, he admitted. Then it's working, she said with a smirk. Come on, let's get this show on the road. Back in her workshop, Tamsin began her clandestine operation with the precision of someone used to working in the shadows. Not that there were many shadows on Vesta Prime, but she'd learned to create her own. It wasn't long before she had a small device rigged up, a hybrid of human and Zalithian tech. It was a risky gamble, an unintended discovery, and they might find themselves in a Zalithian holding cell, or worse. Let's see if we can keep them out of our business, Tamsin said as she connected the final wire. Or at least confused enough to buy us some time. Lyric watched her work, his expression a mix of admiration and concern. You're sure about this? Nope, she admitted, but since when has that stopped me? That earned a chuckle. Fair point. So what's the plan? Simple, Tamsin said, though it was anything but. This little doohickey should scramble their scanners, give us a chance to dig into the tech without them breathing down our necks, and if they catch on, they'll probably do their best to make us disappear, Tamsin said, her tone light but her eyes serious. So let's not get caught. Understood, Lyric said, nodding. I'll keep them distracted. You do your thing. As Lyric left, Tamsin set to work, her focus now entirely on the task at hand. The Earth tech was a puzzle she'd been trying to piece together for weeks, each fragment a tantalizing glimpse into something larger and far more dangerous. It was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with half the colors missing and the other half painted over with Zalithian hieroglyphs. The device in front of her was a mishmash of wires and circuit boards, its purpose as elusive as the meaning of life itself. But Tamsin had always been good at seeing patterns where others saw chaos. If there was an answer here, she'd find it. Hours ticked by, the oppressive silence broken only by the hum of machinery and the occasional distant clatter. Tamsin worked tirelessly, her mind a whirl of calculations and creative swearing when things didn't go as planned. But slowly, piece by piece, the puzzle began to make sense. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear Lyric return until he spoke. How's it going? Complicated, Tamsin replied without looking up. But I think I'm onto something. That's the spirit, he said, pulling up a chair beside her. Just don't blow us up before we figure it out, all right? No promises, she said with a grin. But seriously, I've found a potential way to stabilize the anomaly. It's a long shot, but if we can pull it off, then we might actually have a chance of keeping the Zalithians off our backs. Exactly, Tamsin said. But it's going to take a little more time. And a lot more luck. Story of our lives, Lyric replied. Let's just hope the universe is feeling generous for once. As Tamsin continued her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something monumental. Whether it would lead to salvation or disaster was anyone's guess, but one thing was certain: the stakes had never been higher. In the end, Tamsin knew they couldn't rely on luck alone. It would take every ounce of cunning, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness they possessed to face what was coming. And if the Zalithians thought they could intimidate Vesta Prime into submission, well, they were in for a rude awakening. Here's to surviving, Tamsin murmured once more, her voice barely audible over the hum of machinery. And to whatever the hell is coming next. Tamsin was elbow-deep in wires and muttering something obscene about Zalithians when the Earth tech in front of her decided to have a little identity crisis. It emitted a pulse of energy that sent her tools clattering to the floor and filled the room with a buzzing that made the calm sound like a lullaby. The lights flickered, and for a moment she felt like she was standing at the center of a cosmic rave, minus the fun. Well, that's new, she muttered, scrambling to shut the thing down before it showed off more of its party tricks. As the machine wound down, Tamsin noticed a subtle change in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up like soldiers at attention. It was the kind of feeling that usually preceded something very unfortunate, like a Zalithian inspection or a missing shipment of essentials. She had a sneaking suspicion this was far worse. Lyric burst through the door, his face a palette of colors that suggested he'd been on the receiving end of the machine's little tantrum. What the hell was that? Just an earthly hello, Tamsin quipped, though the joke fell flat even to her own ears. It's emitting some kind of energy wave. Didn't think it'd be strong enough to cause, well, whatever just happened. People are seeing things, Lyric said, his voice edged with something like panic. Hallucinations, paranoia. I just had to break up a fight over an imaginary spider invasion. Tamsin blinked. Please tell me you're joking. I'm not, he replied grimly. And the Zalithians are getting twitchy. They're demanding to know what we've been doing with their precious tech. Oh, just trying to avoid our inevitable destruction by cosmic misunderstandings, Tamsin said. They buying it, not even close, Lyric said. Sarax is threatening military intervention if we can't prove we're not behind this. Fantastic. Just what we needed, Tamsin said, rubbing her temples. Any bright ideas? We need to stabilize this thing, Lyric said, or at least convince them we're trying. Otherwise, we'll have a Zalithian armada breathing down our necks. Great. No pressure then, she said, her sarcasm layered with the kind of dry wit that could set off a dust storm. Let's just hope this thing can be reasoned with. Lyric echoed, incredulous. You're talking about it like it's a sentient being. I'm starting to think it might be, Tamsin said, casting a wary eye at the dormant device. Or at least has a mind of its own when it comes to causing chaos. Lyric shook his head, clearly out of patience with both the situation and Tamsin's peculiar optimism. Then let's deal with it before it makes things worse. With a resigned nod, Tamsin turned her attention back to the machine, determined to uncover its secrets or die trying. Preferably the former, but on Vesta Prime, you couldn't be picky. The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity and increasingly inventive cursing. The tech was a stubborn beast. Each attempt to stabilize it met with a new and equally frustrating malfunction. Tamsin was beginning to think she should quit and start writing instruction manuals on how not to deal with alien tech. Meanwhile, outside the workshop, the colony was descending into a chaos that could only be described as apocalyptic. People were on edge, the hallucinations making everyone jumpy and suspicious. It was like someone had spiked the water supply with paranoia and fear, and no one was handling it well. Lyric was doing his best to keep the peace, but it was like trying to herd cats that had just been given a bath. The Zalithians weren't helping matters, stomping around like they owned the place and making demands that were as unreasonable as they were impossible. Tamsin could hear Sarax's voice blaring over the comm, issuing decrees with all the grace and subtlety of a sledgehammer. Compliance will be enforced, he droned, like a broken record that had run out of new threats to spew. Non-compliance will result in punitive measures. Punitive measures, Tamsin scoffed, smacking the side of the device with a wrench. We're not exactly rolling in options here, Sarax. We're lucky if we can get a decent cup of synth-calf, let alone mount a resistance. As if in response, the device sparked and whirred, sending a jolt up her arm that nearly took her off her feet. Good to see you're feeling chatty today, she grimaced, shaking her hand as if it could flick away the lingering tingles. She was about to try another approach when Lyric stumbled in, looking like he'd just done 10 rounds with a particularly disgruntled asteroid. "We've got a problem," he said, which, given the circumstances, was about as helpful as announcing the sky was still gray. "What now?" Tamsin asked, not really wanting to know but suspecting she didn't have much choice. "The Zalithians have called for reinforcements," Lyric said, his voice tight with urgency. "If we don't get a handle on this soon, we're going to have more company. Perfect." "Just perfect," Tamsin muttered, as if she'd misplaced a winning lottery ticket and found a parking ticket instead. "All right, let's see if we can at least give them a reason to delay." With renewed determination, she dove back into the tangled mess of wires and circuits, her mind racing with possibilities. The device was like a puzzle made by someone who enjoyed torture as a hobby, but she was nothing if not persistent. It was during one particularly frustrating attempt to reroute the power flow that she noticed something. A pattern hidden beneath layers of complexity and chaos. It was like seeing a familiar face in a crowd of strangers, a glimmer of understanding amid the confusion. "Wait a minute," she breathed, her fingers dancing over the controls. "I think I've got something." Lyric leaned in, his expression one of cautious optimism. "What is it?" "There's a sequence here," she explained, her excitement barely contained. "If I can sync it with the colonist systems, we might be able to stabilize the energy waves. At least long enough to stave off a Zalithian invasion." "Do it," he urged, "before they decide to turn us into an example." "No pressure," Tamsin said with a crooked grin, her hands steady but her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. She worked quickly, the air around her charged with tension. Each movement was precise, calculated, a dance with technology that could tip either way toward salvation or disaster. Finally, with a few deft adjustments, she held her breath and flipped the switch. The room went silent, the device humming quietly as if contemplating its next move. "Well?" Lyric asked, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Tamsin exhaled slowly, her eyes fixed on the machine. "I think it's working. The energy waves are stabilizing, you think?" He pressed, his patience tested. "It's the best I've got," she admitted, knowing full well that ambiguity wasn't what either of them wanted to hear. Just then, the comm crackled to life. Sarax's voice was as regal and condescending as ever. "Colony Control, report status." Lyric gave Tamsin a look that could have melted steel. She nodded, taking a deep breath before responding. "This is Tamsin Cord. We've managed to stabilize the tech. Temporary, but it's holding." There was a pause, a silence so thick it felt like it had weight. "Acknowledged," Sarax finally replied. "Our operatives will confirm. Stand by for further instructions." Tamsin let out a long breath, a mix of relief and exhaustion. Well, that's one crisis averted. For now, Lyric clapped her on the shoulder, his expression a rare blend of respect and camaraderie. "You did good, Tam. Don't thank me yet," she cautioned. "We still need to figure out what this thing is really doing. And why. Are you saying it's not just here to make our lives interesting?" Lyric teased, though his tone was far from light. "I'm saying we're sitting on a powder keg and I'd rather not be here when it blows," she replied. "Fair enough," he said. "What's our next move?" "First, We need to keep the Zalithians from poking around too much, Tamsin said, her mind already racing ahead. Then we need to figure out how to control this thing. Or at least understand it enough to prevent another meltdown. Sounds like a plan, Lyric said, though there was little conviction in his voice. More like the resigned acceptance of someone who knew they were trapped in a story that refused to have a happy ending. And if all else fails, Tamsin added, a smirk playing on her lips, we can always start an intergalactic rock band. Cut a deal with the other side and ride the cosmic waves to freedom. Lyric chuckled, the sound a brief reprieve from the looming shadows. I'll start practicing my air guitar. With the device temporarily under control, they headed back outside, the familiar dreariness of Vesta Prime stretching out before them like an old, worn-out coat. The sky was still an unforgiving gray, the landscape as barren as ever. But for the first time in a while, Tamsin felt a flicker of hope. Think we've bought ourselves some time? Lyric asked, his gaze scanning the horizon as if expecting the Zalithian fleet to drop from the sky at any moment. Maybe, Tamsin said, though the uncertainty in her voice was palpable. But we can't keep this up forever. Sooner or later, something's gotta give. I know, Lyric agreed. But until it does, we'll keep doing what we do best. And what's that? Tamsin asked, genuinely curious. Surviving, he replied, his tone tinged with a resilience that mirrored her own. As the dust-laden wind whispered through the colony, Tamsin couldn't help but wonder if they were fighting a battle they could never hope to win. But as she looked at Lyric and the others, she knew one thing for certain, they wouldn't go down without a fight. And if the universe was intent on testing them, they'd be damned if they didn't give it a run for its money. So what now? Lyric asked, breaking the silence. Now, Tamsin said, a mischievous glint in her eye. We figure out a way to keep the Zalithians on their toes. And maybe, just maybe, we find out what this tech is really about before it decides to throw another cosmic tantrum. And if it does, Lyric asked, though they both knew the answer. Then we do what we always do, Tamsin said with a shrug. Improvise. With that, they turned back toward the colony, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be pretty, but if there was one thing they could count on, it was each other. And in a universe that seemed hell-bent on destruction, that was something worth fighting for. Tamsin Cord stood amidst the chaos of Vesta Prime's colony hub, feeling about as useful as a solar panel in a cave. The air was thick with tension. At least, she hoped it was tension and not the usual stench of the recycling unit acting up again. Around her, colonists were pacing like caged animals, each one looking as if they'd just seen a ghost, or worse, a Zalithian tax collector. Lyric Valter, sporting a black eye that could only suggest he'd been on the wrong end of a misunderstanding, sidled up beside her. The Zalithians are prepping to storm the place, he said, his voice as resigned as a man who just realized he's been drinking decaf his whole life. Tamsin grimaced. Fantastic. I was just thinking we needed some extra drama. She glanced at the calm, which had mercifully fallen silent after Sarex's last decree. The Zalithian had been practically drooling over the tech they were now desperate to pry from Tamsin's reluctant fingers. How's our little bundle of joy? Lyric nodded at the Earth tech, a contraption that looked like it was assembled by a committee of drunken aliens, each with a vendetta against engineering. Stable for now, Tamsin said, though she'd learned long ago that stable on Vesta Prime was about as reliable as a 2-credit hoverboard. I think there's more to this thing than just ruining our day. It might actually be capable of harnessing the anomaly's power. Lyric raised an eyebrow, the one that didn't have a purple ring around it. And how exactly do you plan to use that without blowing us all to bits? She shrugged. Trial and error, heavy on the error probably, but if this thing can stabilize the energy waves for good, we might just have something the Zalithians want more than our heads. And if it doesn't work, Lyric asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer, then we're royally screwed. Tamsin flashed a wicked grin. But hey, at least we'll go out with a bang. The colony was slipping deeper into chaos. Paranoia flitted through the crowds like a virus, turning normally mundane disputes into full-blown skirmishes. Tamsin couldn't blame them. Between the hallucinations and the constant threat of Zalithian intervention, it was like living in a particularly nasty fever dream. Think you can get it working before the big bad Zalithians come knocking? Lyric's eyes were half hopeful, half resigned, sort of like a child watching an ice cream truck drive past without stopping. Tamsin sighed. I've got no choice but to try. It's either that or sit around waiting for Sarax to give us a one-way ticket to oblivion. She looked around at the bustling chaos. And frankly, I'm running out of clever things to say at our funeral. Lyric chuckled, a dry sound that echoed the grim humor they'd both come to rely on. Guess you'd better get to it then. She nodded, more to herself than to him, and headed back into the workshop where the tech was laid out like a corpse on a slab, except this corpse occasionally sparked and made sounds that might have been a digital language or just indigestion. The thing was a nightmare of circuitry and wires, all tangled up like a particularly aggressive spider's web. Tamsin rolled up her sleeves. "All right, you piece of junk," she muttered, grabbing her tools. "Let's see what you've got." Hours passed in a blur of soldering and swearing. Tamsin worked with the kind of single-minded focus usually reserved for people trying to make it through a family reunion without losing their sanity. Her fingers danced over the controls, occasionally sending a spark flying into the air or a curse flying from her lips. It was during one of these moments, just as she was about to throw her wrench across the room in frustration, that she noticed something. A glimmer of coherence in the chaos, a line of code that didn't seem entirely random. "Huh," she said aloud, her voice bouncing off the walls like a bad joke at the wrong party. "What are you hiding, you sneaky bastard?" She leaned closer, eyes narrowing as she traced the sequence. It was a key of sorts, a way to align the tech with the anomaly's fluctuating energy, if she could just tweak it the right way. "Hey, Lyric," she called, not taking her eyes off her work. "Get your butt in here." Lyric appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd just been dragged backwards through a hedge. "What now?" "I think I've got something," Tamsin said, a grin spreading across her face. "If I can just get this thing to sync with the anomaly, we might be able to stabilize everything." "For how long?" Lyric asked, skepticism thick in his voice. "Long enough to make the Zalithians think twice about rushing in here all blasters blazing." He nodded. "All right. Do it." With a steadying breath, Tamsin made the final adjustments, her hands moving with the precision of someone who knew she was about to take the ultimate test, with a pass/fail marked by survival. She flicked the switch, and the device hummed to life, the lights on it blinking in a sequence that was almost soothing. Almost. Outside, the colony seemed to collectively hold its breath. The paranoia eased like a gust of wind had blown through, clearing the fog. People began to blink in confusion, shaking off the hallucinations as if waking from a bad dream. Lyric let out a low whistle. "I'll be damned, it's working." "Temporary fix," Tamsin said quickly, not daring to let herself feel relief. "We're still sitting on a powder keg." "Yeah, but at least it's not exploding right this second." "I'll take that as a win." Tamsin leaned back, wiping her brow. "Now we just need to convince the Zalithians it's in their best interest to leave us the hell alone." "How do you propose we do that?" Lyric asked, crossing his arms. "We play nice, for starters. Let them see the tech is stable but not in their control. Make them think twice about storming in here. And if that doesn't work, we'll just have to improvise." "Improvise?" Lyric echoed, a mix of amusement and exasperation in his voice. "Sure," Tamsin said with a shrug. "Isn't that what we've been doing all along?" As if on cue, the comm system crackled to life, Sarax's voice oozing through the speakers like syrup over a bad breakfast. "Colony Control, report status." Lyric shot Tamsin a look and she nodded, stepping up to the comm. "This is Tamsin Cord. The tech is stable. The anomaly is under control for now." There was a pause, the kind that only came when someone was weighing whether or not to believe you. "Acknowledged," Sarax replied, his voice dripping with suspicion. "Our operatives will verify. Stand by for further instructions." Tamsin sighed. Operatives, huh? Sounds like we've got company coming, Lyric. They always did know how to crash a party, he said with a smirk. What's the plan? We keep them distracted. Show them what we want them to see and nothing more. Meanwhile, I'll keep working on understanding this toy and make sure it doesn't blow us to kingdom come. And if it all goes sideways, Tamsin met his gaze, her expression as determined as ever. Then we make sure we take a few of them with us. Lyric chuckled, clapping her on the shoulder. I knew there was a reason I liked you, Tam. Let's not get mushy, she replied, though her grin took the sting out of her words. We've got a job to do. With renewed determination, they set to work. The Zalithians might have numbers and firepower, but Tamsin and Lyric had something better. Sheer bloody-mindedness and the kind of crazy optimism that only came from having nothing left to lose. As Tamsin tinkered with the tech, she couldn't help but think of the Zalithians as a particularly annoying rash, one that just wouldn't go away, no matter how much ointment you threw at it. They'd have to be careful, cunning, and perhaps a little bit lucky. But for the first time in a long while, Tamsin felt like they had a fighting chance. The Zalithians might be ready to seize the tech by force, but they'd have to get through her first. And if there was one thing Tamsin Cord knew how to do, it was make things difficult for anyone who underestimated her. Time to show these Zalithians what we're made of, she said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. Lyric nodded, his own expression a mirror of her resolve. Damn right. Let's give them a hell of a show. Together, they faced the uncertain future with a mix of trepidation and defiance. The stakes were high, the odds stacked against them, but Tamsin wouldn't have it any other way. After all, it's hard to find a good challenge out in the vastness of space, and if the universe wanted a fight, it had certainly come to the right place. The comm buzzed again, the kind of sound that made Tamsin wish she could swat it like a mosquito. The Zalithians were on their way, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were salivating at the thought of turning Vesta Prime into their personal playground. If it weren't for the fact that they were likely to bring their trigger-happy friends with them, she might have been amused by their enthusiasm. Lyric stood beside her, tapping his foot with the impatience of a man waiting for his number at the DMV. So, we're really doing this, huh? He said, arms crossed over his chest like he was bracing for a gust of wind, except this wind came with lasers. Looks like it, Tamsin replied, her voice carrying a hint of forced optimism. In reality, she was about as optimistic as a fish in a frying pan. We've managed to keep the tech stable, but we're going to need more than that to keep the Zalithians from turning us into space debris. Lyric scratched his chin, a smirk playing on his lips. We could always try asking them nicely. Tamsin snorted. Sure, right after I teach a drone to sing opera. No, we're going to need everyone to rally together. The only way we stand a chance is if we convince the colonists they've got more to gain by staying than by running. Ah, yes. The old united we stand, divided we get vaporized speech. Classic. Hey, I never said I was a motivational speaker, Tamsin shot back. But if we're going down, we might as well make it interesting. They both knew that interesting was just another word for suicidal in this context, but it wasn't like they had a plethora of options. Tamsin squared her shoulders, scanning the chaotic scene in front of her. Colonists milled about, some clutching at their heads as if trying to shake off the last vestiges of their hallucinations. All right, everyone, listen up, Tamsin shouted, her voice carrying over the din like a whip crack. Heads turned, eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. We've got trouble coming, big, green, and armed to the teeth. But we've got a chance to show them that messing with Vesta Prime is a bad idea. The murmuring crowd began to settle, the reality of the situation sinking in. Tamsin continued, we've got tech on our side and we're going to use it to our advantage. If we can keep it stable, we can make it so they can't touch us without getting singed. And if they do get here, one voice called out, the question hanging in the air like a cloud of toxic gas. Tamsin met the question head-on. Then we make sure they regret it. We know this place better than they do, it's our home, and we're not giving it up without a fight. There was a moment of silence, the kind that's pregnant with possibility, before the crowd erupted in a cacophony of agreement. There were cheers, claps, and more than a few shouts of profanity-laden encouragement. Typical Vesta Prime spirit, Tamsin thought with a smirk. Lyric leaned in, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Well, you've got them fired up. Let's hope they don't fizzle out. We'll keep them busy," Tamsin said, her mind already racing with a dozen different plans. "If we can just keep the Zalithians distracted long enough, maybe we'll find something in this tech that'll give us an edge." "Like a hidden piss-off Zalithian function," Lyric suggested. "Exactly," Tamsin replied with a grin. "Or at least something that doesn't involve turning us into a crater." With the colonists rallied, Tamsin and Lyric dove back into the workshop, the Earth tech at the center of their operations. It hummed with potential, lights flickering in a rhythm that was almost soothing. Almost. "All right, you hunk of junk," Tamsin muttered, her fingers dancing over the controls. "Show me your secrets." She was half convinced the machine would remain stubbornly silent, but to her surprise, a previously hidden panel slid open on the side. "Well, that's new," she said, raising an eyebrow. Lyric peered over her shoulder. "What's it got?" "Looks like more wiring," Tamsin said, though she could feel the adrenaline kicking in. Her instincts told her this was more than just a tangle of circuits. She reached inside, heart pounding in her chest as she felt around the labyrinth of wires. Her fingers brushed against something smooth and cool, a small disc embedded within the mess. "What the hell are you?" she whispered, carefully extracting it and holding it up to the light. It emitted a faint blue glow, pulsing in time with the machine's hum. Lyric frowned. "Looks like a power cell or something." "Or something," Tamsin echoed, already feeling the possibilities buzzing in her brain like an overcaffeinated bee. "If this is what I think it is, we might have more leverage than we thought." Without hesitation, she returned to the machine, plugging the disc into a slot that seemed to fit it perfectly. The device's hum grew louder, more insistent, as if it was waking up from a long slumber. Tamsin, is it supposed to do that?" Lyric asked, a hint of alarm creeping into his voice. "Only one way to find out," she replied, her hand hovering over the switch. "Here goes nothing." She flipped the switch and the room was immediately bathed in a brilliant blue light. The machine buzzed with newfound energy, the lights on its surface blinking in a rapid, purposeful sequence. Tamsin stared, a grin stretching across her face as she realized what they'd stumbled upon. "Lyric, I think we just found our piss-off Zalithian function." The device had shifted its energy output, creating a sort of electromagnetic field that, if Tamsin's hurried calculations were correct, could disrupt the Zalithians' tech without harming the colony. Lyric let out a low whistle, eyes wide with disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned. What do we do now?" "We use it," Tamsin said firmly, her mind made up. "We set up the field, make sure the Zalithians can't get a foothold. With any luck, they'll back off long enough for us to figure out a permanent solution. And if they don't, then we'll just have to get creative with whatever else this thing is hiding." With the new plan in place, they worked tirelessly, coordinating with the colonists to fortify the hub and prepare for the Zalithians' arrival. Tamsin's hands were a blur as she fine-tuned the settings, ensuring that the field would be as effective as possible. As they worked, the tension in the colony mounted, a palpable thing that hung in the air like a bad smell. But there was also hope, fragile and tentative, but they're all the same. "Hey, Tamsin," Lyric said, breaking the silence that had settled over them as they worked. "You think we're actually going to pull this off?" Tamsin paused, considering his question. "Honestly, I've got no idea, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let those Zalithians take this place without a fight." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're one hell of a stubborn woman, you know that." "Stubborn's just a nice way of saying I don't know when to quit," she shot back, a playful glint in her eyes. As they made the final preparations, Tamsin couldn't help but marvel at the resourcefulness and resilience of the colonists. They might be a motley crew, held together by little more than duct tape and desperation, but they were hers, and for better or worse, they weren't going down without giving the Zalithians a run for their money. The calm buzzed again, and Tamsin felt her stomach twist in an unpleasant way. "Here we go," she muttered, pressing the button to answer. "This is colony control," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her. Sarax's voice crackled through the speaker as oily as ever. "We're on approach. Prepare to stand down and relinquish control of the tech." Tamsin exchanged a glance with Lyric, who nodded in silent agreement. "Sorry, Sarax," she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "We're a little busy at the moment. Why don't you come back later when we're not, fighting for our lives?" There was a pause, then Sarax's voice returned, tinged with annoyance. "You will comply or face the consequences." Tamsin grinned, feeling the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Oh, we're ready for you, don't worry about that. But you might want to think about what the consequences are for you." She cut the comm before Sarax could respond, turning to Lyric with a determined expression. "All right, let's get this show on the road." The Zalithians' arrival was marked by a series of bright flashes in the sky, their ships descending like predatory birds. Tamsin held her breath, fingers hovering over the controls of the tech. If this didn't work. But there was no time for second-guessing. As the first of the Zalithian ships drew near, Tamsin activated the device, the blue light flaring to life as the electromagnetic field spread outwards like an invisible shield. Almost immediately, the approaching ships shuddered, their systems going haywire as the field interfered with their controls. Tamsin watched, heart in her throat, as the Zalithians struggled to maintain their formation. "It's working," Lyric said, his voice filled with awe. "Tamsin, it's actually working." "Don't get cocky," she warned, though her own relief was impossible to hide. "We've still got a lot to do." As the Zalithians scrambled to regroup, Tamsin and Lyric continued to monitor the tech, making adjustments as needed to keep the field stable. It was a precarious balance, one that required constant vigilance and no small amount of luck. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Tamsin allowed herself to hope. They'd managed to hold off one crisis, and with any luck they might just be able to hold off the next. As the Zalithians faltered, the colonists rallied, their confidence bolstered by the unexpected turn of events. Together, they began to push back, determined to reclaim their home from those who sought to take it from them. "We're not out of the woods yet," Lyric said, his voice low but steady. "But damn, if this isn't the best chance we've got." Tamsin nodded, a fierce grin on her face as she watched the skies. "Let's show them what Vesta Prime is made of." Tamsin's fingers danced over the controls like a virtuoso pianist in a dive bar, coaxing every last ounce of power from the Earth tech. The machine groaned like it was waking up after a bender, but the blue light flared brighter, illuminating the colony hub with an eerie glow. It wasn't a disco, but it would do. "All right, you overgrown toaster," Tamsin muttered. "Let's see if you can play nice with the locals." She shot a glance at Lyric, who was doing his best impression of someone who knew what they were doing. Spoiler alert, he didn't. "We're really doing this, huh?" Lyric asked, eyes wide as he watched the Zalithian ships struggle in the distance. They looked like drunken fireflies, sporadically lit and more than a little confused. The electromagnetic field was wreaking havoc with their systems. "Yep," Tamsin replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's hope our homemade anti-Zalithian bug zapper holds up. Well, if it doesn't, at least we'll have front row seats to our own obliteration," Lyric said with a dry chuckle, rubbing his bruised eye. Tamsin smirked, her usual mask of cynicism slipping for just a moment. "Look at you, Mr. Optimism. Got any other bright ideas?" "Nah," Lyric replied. "I left my genius at home today, right next to my sense of self-preservation." With the Zalithian ships shuddering like they were caught in some cosmic hiccup, Tamsin and Lyric got to work stabilizing the anomaly. It was like trying to calm a tantrum-throwing toddler with nothing but a rusty spoon and good intentions. Tamsin twisted a knob, punched a button, and whispered sweet nothings to the tech like it was a temperamental love interest. The blue glow intensified, enveloping the colony with an invisible shield that made the place feel less like a target and more like a fortress. Lyric glanced at the readouts. "Hey Tam, you sure this thing won't turn us into toasted marshmallows?" Pretty sure, Tamsin replied, though she wasn't sure of much these days. Besides, if it does, we'll be the most delicious martyrs this side of the galaxy. That's comforting, Lyric said, rolling his eyes. I always wanted my death to come with a side of s'mores. The Zalithian ships were having a hell of a time getting their gears in order. Tamsin almost felt sorry for them, almost. She watched as they struggled to regain control, their sleek vessels now looking more like squabbling space junk than the terrifying armada they'd intended. Guess they didn't plan for their tech going haywire, Lyric quipped, crossing his arms. Or for us being stubborn enough to keep poking the bear, Tamsin added, grinning. On the comm, Sarax's voice crackled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Your interference will not. Save it, Sarax, Tamsin interrupted, cutting him off. Why don't you go play with your shiny toys somewhere else? There was a pause, and Tamsin could practically hear Sarax seething. You have been warned, he said, his voice dripping with venom. She cut the comm again, turning back to Lyric. You know, I think I actually enjoy pissing him off. Yeah, well, don't enjoy it too much, Lyric said, peering at the monitors. I think they are regrouping. Sure enough, the Zalithian ships were attempting to form an awkward line, like a drunken Kangad dance across the skies. The electromagnetic field was still holding, but how long it could keep them at bay was anyone's guess. Tamsin took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. We need to up the ante, she said, push this thing to its limits. You sure about that? Lyric asked, his skepticism as prominent as the bruise on his face. About as sure as I am about anything, Tamsin replied with a shrug, which is to say not at all. But what choice do we have? None, unless you're up for surrendering, he said, his lips curling into a sarcastic grin. Not today, Tamsin shot back, her fingers flying over the controls with renewed determination. She adjusted the tech, redirecting its power to reinforce the field. The blue light pulsed, growing more intense, a beacon of defiance in the dark. The Zalithians, clearly not ones to take a hint, were still trying to push through the field. Their ships sputtered and sparked, systems flailing under the electromagnetic interference. Tamsin watched as one ship veered wildly off course, narrowly avoiding a collision with its neighbor. Looks like they're not having the best day, Lyric noted, his tone somewhere between smug satisfaction and genuine concern. Well, if they wanted a warm welcome, they should have brought cookies, Tamsin said, her attention still focused on the tech. Instead, they brought the kind of attitude that gets you kicked out of bars. As the Zalithians continued their haphazard attempts to breach the field, Tamsin and Lyric worked tirelessly to maintain the anomaly's stability. It was a delicate dance, one that required precision and, frankly, more luck than either of them were comfortable relying on. Think we can keep this up? Lyric asked, glancing between the monitors and Tamsin. We have to, she replied, determination etched into her features. If we don't, they'll steamroll over us, and I'd rather not be a pancake today. With the tech humming with newfound energy, Tamsin began to wonder if they might actually pull this off. Hope, that fragile and often misguided little spark, flickered to life within her. Maybe, just maybe, they could hold the Zalithians at bay long enough to force a stalemate. As if reading her thoughts, Lyric nodded towards the comm. Think they'll call for a truce, or are they too proud for that? Only one way to find out, Tamsin said. Let's see if they're ready to talk turkey. She reopened the comm channel, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Sarax, you still there? Or did you go off to sulk in a corner? Sarax's voice came back, tinny and strained. We have no intention of retreating, but... Perhaps negotiations are in order. Tamsin raised an eyebrow, exchanging a knowing look with Lyric. Oh, so now you want to play nice. What happened to all that swagger and bluster? We are still prepared to enforce our claim, Sarax replied, the edge of desperation creeping into his voice. But we are willing to discuss terms. All right, we'll talk, Tamsin said, leaning back in her chair. But if you try any funny business, don't blame us if you end up with more than a bad day. Understood, Sarax acknowledged, the tension in his voice palpable. As the Zalithians hovered at the edge of the field, clearly unsure of their next move, Tamsin felt a strange sense of satisfaction. They hadn't won, not yet, but they'd managed to hold their own against an empire known for steamrolling over anything in its path. Lyric let out a low whistle, shaking his head. I can't believe they're actually considering negotiation. Think they've finally realized we're more trouble than we're worth. Hope so, Tamsin replied. Otherwise, we're going to need a hell of a lot more duct tape. With the prospect of negotiations on the horizon, Tamsin and Lyric set about securing the tech, making sure it was stable enough to handle whatever came next. They knew they couldn't let their guard down, not with the Zalithians still looming like a bad hangover just outside their defenses. So what's next? Lyric asked, watching as Tamsin fiddled with the controls. We talk, Tamsin replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. And if that doesn't work, we improvise. More than we already have, Lyric chuckled. Didn't know that was possible. With us, anything's possible, Tamsin shot back. Even surviving this mess. As they prepared for the inevitable diplomatic dance with Sarax and his cronies, Tamsin couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. Against all odds, they'd held their own, proved that they were more than just another backwater colony ripe for exploitation. Think we'll make it through this? Lyric asked, his tone light but his gaze serious. Tamsin met his eyes, her own determination mirrored in his. We have to, for Vesta Prime, for everyone here. We're all in this together and we'll see it through to the end. Lyric nodded, his faith in her unspoken but strong. Then let's give them something to remember us by. With their resolve strengthened and their path clear, Tamsin and Lyric steeled themselves for the negotiations ahead. They knew it wouldn't be easy, that the Zalithians would push for every advantage, but they also knew they had something precious. The will to fight, to survive, to defy the odds and come out swinging. As the blue glow of the anomaly continued to pulse around them, Tamsin and Lyric prepared to face the coming storm with the same tenacity and grit that had brought them this far. Whatever happened next, they knew they'd face it together, united against the darkness that threatened to engulf them. Here's to whatever comes next, Tamsin said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast. Lyric grinned, joining her gesture. And to making it out alive. With a shared nod, they turned their attention back to the task at hand, ready to do whatever it took to protect their home and their people. The battle was far from over, but they were ready, and for the first time in a long while, they dared to hope that they might just come out on top. The skies over Vesta Prime were clear again, the Zalithians having finally decided their imperial rear ends were better parked elsewhere. Maybe Sarax had realized the diplomatic equivalent of a wedgie wasn't worth the trouble, or maybe he'd run out of arrogance, though that was about as likely as Tamsin finding a perfectly functioning piece of tech on her first try. But whatever the reason, the Zalithians had pulled back. Their retreat was like the aftermath of a bad party, empty promises of a rematch and awkward excuses. They left behind a colony sagging under the weight of what might have been, but still standing. Tamsin and Lyric were left with the delightful task of picking up the pieces and trying to slap a smiley face on a situation resembling a tire fire. Nice to know we're not the galaxy's favorite punching bag for now, Lyric quipped, surveying the damage with the air of someone who'd seen it all before and wished he hadn't. Yeah, but give it time, Tamsin replied, fiddling with the Earth tech. It had saved their skins, but like all heroes, it was demanding a vacation. I'm sure the universe will find a new way to kick us in the teeth. Optimism at its finest, Lyric said, leaning against a console that looked ready to rust apart from sheer neglect. Think Earth will send us a thank you card, or maybe even a fruit basket. Tamsin snorted, wiping grime from her hands onto her jumpsuit. I'd settle for them not screwing us over in the next trade deal. But hey, a fruit basket wouldn't hurt, preferably something that doesn't taste like cardboard. The Earth tech hummed gently, the blue glow now a soft, reassuring presence instead of a frantic beacon of desperation. It was the kind of calm that came after a storm, the aftermath where you could take a breath and count your remaining teeth. Think this thing's got more tricks up its sleeve, Lyric asked, nodding towards the tech. Or was this its one big party trick? Hard to say, Tamsin mused. But if it can keep the big bad wolves out, maybe we've got something worth its weight in gold, or whatever precious metal the Zalithians are hoarding these days. Lyric smirked, his black eye a badge of honor in the twisted world of interstellar diplomacy. You sure it won't just blow up in our faces next time? That's the fun of it, isn't it? Tamsin chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. Keeps us on our toes. Besides, nothing says hello universe like playing with fire and hoping you're not the one who gets burned. The colony hub was buzzing with life again, though it was more a sluggish crawl than a sprint. Colonists shuffled about, patching up homes, trading stories of near misses and narrow escapes. It wasn't victory they celebrated, but survival. The difference was subtle but important, like the difference between a hangover and alcohol poisoning. "Hey, you two," called a voice from behind a stack of crates that had once been part of the barricades. It was Dre, a wiry man with the kind of grin that suggested he'd punch a Zalithian in the snout just for fun. "Heard you kept us from becoming Zalithian barbecue. Drinks on me tonight." Tamsin waved him off. "Save it, Dre. We're not heroes, just too stubborn to roll over." "Stubborn works for me," Dre replied with a laugh. "As long as it keeps us breathing." Lyric nodded, watching as Dre ambled away. "That's the thing about humans, isn't it? We might be a pain in our own asses, but give us a cause and we're like a dog with a bone. Won't let go for anything." "Yeah," Tamsin agreed, her gaze distant for a moment. "Stubbornness might just be our greatest asset." As the day wore on, the rebuilding continued. Earth's diplomatic support came through on the comms, all reassuring words and promises of supply shipments that might actually arrive before the next millennium. It was politics in its most polished form, like wrapping a turd in gold foil and calling it a delicacy. "So they're sending ambassadors," Lyric read from the latest message, "to negotiate peace terms and ensure resource management." Tamsin rolled her eyes. "Great, just what we need. More suits telling us how to live on the rock we've been stuck on for years." "At least they're not trying to blow us up," Lyric pointed out, though his voice carried the same sardonic edge it always did. "Small mercies and all." The Earth tech, meanwhile, was doing its best impression of a well-behaved pet, sitting quietly and not throwing any tantrums. It was a temporary lull, Tamsin suspected, but she'd take it. If the thing wanted to behave, she wasn't about to scold it. "Think we should tell them about this?" Lyric asked, nodding towards the tech. "Earth," Tamsin raised an eyebrow. "Sure, if we want them to swoop in and confiscate it for study purposes." "Right, bad idea," Lyric conceded. "Let them think we're just scrappy survivors. No need to show all our cards." "Exactly," Tamsin said. "This tech is our ace in the hole. Might be the only reason we're not Zalithian property right now. I say we keep it that way." As the sun set over the colony, casting long shadows like a noir film too cheap for proper lighting, the air was filled with the chatter of people who still couldn't quite believe they were alive. It was a sound Tamsin found oddly comforting. Maybe it was because it meant she hadn't failed. Not completely, anyway. "You ever wonder what's next for us?" Lyric asked, sitting beside her on an upturned crate that had seen better days. Tamsin shrugged, her gaze lost in the horizon. "Sometimes. Then I remember we've got enough problems without borrowing from tomorrow's misery." "True enough," Lyric said with a weary smile. "But you've got to admit there's something about humans. We're like cockroaches, adaptable, hard to kill." Tamsin chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Yeah, maybe that's why the universe keeps trying. We're a challenge and everyone loves a challenge." For a moment they sat in silence, the quiet punctuated by the occasional shout or clang of metal on metal. The colony was alive in that messy, chaotic way Tamsin had come to appreciate. It was home, or close enough to pass for one. "Think the Zalithians will be back?" Lyric asked, though the question was more formality than genuine curiosity. "Probably," Tamsin replied, leaning back against the crate. "Bullies never stay away for long, but we'll be ready. And if they try again, we'll give them another dose of human stubbornness." Lyric nodded, as if that settled it, as if that was all they needed to hear. Here's to being stubborn then, Tamsin smiled, raising an imaginary glass in the dim light. To being stubborn, and to making it count. The night wore on, the stars above indifferent to the machinations of the tiny creatures below. Yet for all their indifference, they provided a canvas on which Tamsin and Lyric could paint their dreams, of survival, of defiance, of a future where they weren't just fighting to exist, but living life on their own terms. If nothing else, they had proven that humans were more than just survivors. They were fighters, dreamers, and stubborn as hell. And maybe, in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. As the last embers of daylight faded, Tamsin let herself imagine a future where they weren't just the kept pets of a galaxy that saw them as nothing more than a minor inconvenience. It was a nice thought, one she tucked away for a rainy day. For now, there was work to be done. Repairs to make, plans to lay, and a colony to hold together with the equivalent of spit and prayer. But they'd do it because that's what humans did. They got knocked down, then got back up, often with a middle finger raised in defiance. Lyric stretched, yawning. Guess we should call it a night. Not getting any younger, and I'd like to wake up without feeling like I've been hit by a freighter. Right, Tamsin agreed, standing and brushing the dust from her clothes. And hey, maybe tomorrow we'll find out Earth sent us something other than empty promises. They turned towards what passed for their quarters, the makeshift shelters that had housed more dreams and nightmares than they'd like to count. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and for now, that was enough. As they walked, Lyric nudged her with an elbow. Think Sarax will be dreaming of us tonight. If he knows what's good for him, he'll be dreaming of surrender papers, Tamsin replied, grinning. With a shared laugh, they continued into the night, the weight of the day's events settling like a comfortable, if slightly worn, coat around their shoulders. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but they'd face them together. And maybe, just maybe, they'd win again. For now, though, it was enough to have survived and to live in a world where human stubbornness had proven, once again, to be an unbeatable force.